Trey has been one of my favorite guests that I've had on Data and Confused. So this is part two of long conversation that I had with Trey Blalock. Please tune in to the first episode with Trey if you haven't heard that yet. But otherwise, please enjoy as we continue the conversation with Trey.
There's a lot of pen testers that don't know how to test those devices. They're only used to testing, like web servers and stuff. Again and again and again, especially if you look in the last 3-4 years, Chinese attackers are going wild on infrastructure. Whether it's voice over IP systems, because you also have these voice over IP systems that are exposed to the internet. Those are a great place to break into, get into a network. And companies frequently will just say that's out of scope for the pen test because they don't want the pen test to cost more. And then there's a lot of pen testers, they have no idea how to test, a VPN.
I guess when it comes to AI, we're talking about all of the capabilities that the attackers have. 0 days, pulling things apart. I tend to see the 0-day thing as more theoretical at this point. Of course, we don't know for sure, but just in some of the things that I've read about have been, tests that they've done to say, hey, can this thing find, and there'll be a bounty even. Can it find a 0-day, and we'll give it all the code to try to find it?
Yeah, so there's a really good article on Google has a research blog for security. And they have one where they're using LLMs to fuzz, and they basically show how to do that. The problem with 0 days is 0 days have varying levels of complexity. So you may have a 0-day that's literally a single line command. So if we wanted to fuzz firewalls of a particular vendor or whatever, again, you might be the person who finds the next 50 of these different URLs that allow you to just instantly start dropping things. Some attacks are harder than others, but some of 0 days are relatively easy to use as attacks or relatively unique because it's attacking in a way we just didn't expect anyone to attack. There's a lot of different issues with that. So I think because of the cost of running those machine learning models, that's typically going to be the larger attackers that are going to be doing that. But we also have security researchers that do the kind of thing. So it's not that it's not available to people. It's actually, if anything, it's more available than it ever was because the total cost to get to a 0-day, if you're using LLMs for fuzzing, drops by 2 orders of magnitude. Because instead of you literally going A, B, C, D, we're going to try everything in the world, the LLM guides you and says, well, you probably don't need to try these. If you try these first things, that'll tell you where to go deeper. And so they're accelerating things by making it a more intelligent set of fuzzing rules.
What is fuzzing?
Fuzzing is it's almost like a brute force way. So I've got a form that's so let's say it's a web form and it's got a username input, but it could also be any daemon in the world or any process in the world. And what it's doing is it's kind of brute forcing all the different possible all the different possible inputs until it can get it to break. And when we find these areas where it breaks and it gives you an error it shouldn't have given you and stuff like that, that's where we try to say, okay, we found a spot. Can we inject something? And that injection may have to be a binary that's designed for that, kernel. It may be just code. It may be a single Python command. It may be a shell command. It could be any number of different things. But the combination of let's find where things break and then add that to can we now weaponize that combination is basically what they're doing when they fuzz things. And it's basically a really good research tool for finding problems in code. And you can do it to anything. You can do it binaries. There's tons of different fuzzing tools for different types of things. There's fuzzing for just cloud systems. There's fuzzing for IoT devices. There's just a lot of it out there.
So do you think this is going to take sort of the traditional types of attacks that we've seen and just amplify it? Or is there going to be some crazy new novel techniques that come out of this?
We are already seeing new, what I would call novel attacks. So if you look at the attack that occurred on Microsoft Copilot, for example, nobody had been planning realistically as deep for just an email arriving at your company and it being able to lift and get Copilot to take over and run commands internally on your network. And these attackers can send emails to any company in the world. And just that particular bug was kind of an interesting bug because like we've not seen attacks. We've seen email attacks. I mean, we've seen email attacks against like AV systems and stuff like that. But we haven't seen one that leveraged the internal LLMs so that it could say, give the attacker, give me a list of all the APIs in your business. Give me, a list of all your employees. Start literally running commands and then sending emails back and stuff like that. Like those types of things, we're going to see more of these novel attacks, partially because we're putting attack surface in places we just never had it before, or to the extent that we've got it. But the other thing is if you look at attacks, not against corporations, but more targeting individuals and going across dating apps, going across like every different little app you would have on your phone, going across social media attacks. The scalability is allowing, be it disinformation attacks, be it things for different new types of phishing. It's allowing attackers to quickly scale up and run attacks in places we've never thought, and attacks that probably as an individual never would have been a valuable attack. It would have just cost you so much to do this on your own. But now that we have LLMs, it's like the costs have dropped by, 3 orders of magnitude. And so now we can do attacks that they never would have done before. So I do expect it to come out in places that we're just not expecting, where we've never had attacks before. And again, the attackers targeting humans is changing too. The APTs have realized one of the better ways to attack large organizations that have good security is attack all their employees on their home devices. And if you look at some of the databases that get leaked out onto like dark websites, like even LinkedIn's a good really example. A few years ago, a LinkedIn database got dropped and it had all the work addresses and all the personal addresses associated with a LinkedIn account. So you could see like 6 or so of these with an account. An attacker could then say like, well, I've got their personal email. They tend to use this Gmail, Yahoo, or whatever account. I know that's a target because they work at this company. Maybe I find that on LinkedIn. I'm going to go attack them and hopefully get, when they're checking their personal mail on a computer, or maybe get in on their personal devices, their personal iPad and stuff, to learn more about what this researcher at a company is doing. So the ability to do more in-depth attacks has just gone up tremendously because of AI.
What can we do to protect our family members, like aging population? Like, what do you do to protect your family members? Because I'm sure, you think about this kind of thing, and people are people in our lives. What can we do to help them?
Yeah. So there are a couple of things that you can do. One thing that's really important is to educate them about, like, these are the problems. The second thing is have a password that's like, something that doesn't sound like a password, like, say like, if you question this, let's, do some weird joke or reference something so that, if you don't think it's me, let's do this thing so that it's me and it's not something that, has ever been discussed in email or something. There's a lot of different ways that you can handle that. If you're a more, part of it depends on how savvy the adult is and stuff like that. My concern around that is the biggest space that I see that's the most dangerous is the social media apps. And I find that, we can kind of get adults not to answer the phone for unknown numbers. We can kind of get where, they're less likely to be victimized from certain things. And there's attackers where the attacker hires a call center, gives them a legitimate script, and it says, we are a church and we had a victim get burned, and we want you to call everyone in this area code and say, hey, Johnny got burned and he didn't have insurance and, blah, 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 and try to get money from these people. The call center doesn't even know they're part of a crime, and they could be rerouting millions of dollars over time in donations from vulnerably elder people who think they're doing the right thing, and capturing credit cards because it's going to a fake PCI environment or something like that. So there are a lot of attacks that can be prevented by just cutting off the ability for them to be vulnerable. But they're within certain ecosystems like social media. I don't think there's an easy solution that won't be coming from the social media companies. And I don't think,
Facebook Marketplace, no bueno.
yeah, yeah. And it's hard. But the education has to occur and we're not doing it. Minimizing what you can, trying to have things that are less online and more human, like picking up the phone to actually call and stuff like that.
But what about deepfakes? Like fast forward a couple of years, like what kinds of things do you expect we're going to see
Deepfakes
in
have gone
2027?
wild. I've actually done like television and like a couple of public talks on this exact thing. The biggest deepfake problem, the more interesting like one that I've seen, I guess, is like people creating fake bodies and joining business meetings like a Zoom call and negotiating things like the sale of a business that wasn't an actual business being sold to get money wired into an account. Like, and they do this through like business email compromise. They see like there's a likely conversation to occur, or maybe like somebody had, and I've had clients where it's like something bad happened and there's an insurance provider is about to do a payout.
Okay.
And then what the insurance provider, or somebody had to pay the insurance provider, I forget. And what they did is the guys monitoring their email injected themselves quickly and said, oh yeah, we're the insurance company and here's the information. You need to wire $800,000 or whatever to this address and that we'll just consider it covered. And that money went out the door. 2 or 3 days later, the real insurance company's like, hey, we need to talk to you about this thing. And he's like, I already paid you. And they're like, no, you didn't. These are happening across, and again, it's happening in dating sites. It's happening in a lot of different areas. But it's a different set of attackers. But I think some of these business meeting ones is really bad. The other area that I find horrific is interviewing. Like, it's so easy to take advantage of employees that are looking for a job. You can get on a video interview like this, record so you've got like 5 minutes of that person's voice pattern. You've got what their body looks like. Their head's tilting enough that you can see what their ears look like. You can make a 3D model. Not only that, but you can get them to send you the passport. You can get them to send a copy of your driver's license and stuff.
Sure.
In certain cases, they'll fake like it's a contract environment. And they're like, well, we need to do direct deposit. Give us a copy of your check. And we're going to set you up. And it looks like an whole HR onboarding. The whole thing's a scam. And you just lost everything data-wise. Not only can they replicate you, they can replicate you. They've got like copies and, literally in cases of your signature, your bank account information. They know what you sound like. I mean, it is horrific how quickly they can get data from you. And the same thing, like I look at these dark websites that just sell IDs. And so they work with companies that are doing business email. So there's an entire business chain behind like ransomware. And so the ransomware guys say, well, we just downloaded 3 million emails from a company and we included in that 50,000 driver's licenses from where people applied for a job, and they sent that in over email and the HR never deleted it. And so they get all the driver's licenses, they get all the passports, whatever it is. And then they sell those on other dark websites. And so here's copies of, I want to buy 10,000 US passports, and there are high resolution scans of US passports. And a lot of people just have no idea there's a big industry of that. And a lot of people don't know, because that happens with business email compromise, they don't even know that they should have been deleting that. Like almost no company I go into has a policy to tell HR only do uploads of, driver's licenses to a secure website or through some other app. They're all sending it in via email, and none of them are deleting it. And so these problems are rampant.
I'm face palming right now. Yeah, I mean, it feels like some of the things you mentioned is like, all right, we can put CrowdStrike on the system, for example, Sentinel-1, Defender, whatever, and that can stop a certain level of things. I mentioned push security earlier. Maybe that can stop a certain level of things. But things like this, things like, people just doing dumb stuff, I guess. Sending information over unsecure email. Yeah, I guess.
And part of it's a business culture flaw. It's like, we're still used to doing business like it's the Wild West, and we're still used to sending passports and driver's licenses and email. Like, if our business culture were more mature, that would be an unacceptable ask. And there was no way we would be doing that. And we would be doing things where we vet who the company is. We make sure that they've got so many employees. We know it's a real company, and we only do it through this specific upload.
How much, I'm sure, so, when you run into companies that have had a ransomware attack, or you're working with them doing penetration testing or whatever, I would imagine some aspect of that is doing some kind of cybersecurity training for employees, whether it's more advanced training for, the cyber team or the IT team, or just general cybersecurity awareness training. How effective is that?
Most of the security awareness training I've seen, like 99% of it, I find is not effective at all.
Wow.
And in fact, if you look at like I do phishing, I'm doing a phishing thing this week actually, and it's like they've been trained hundreds of times on like, it's so easy. That's another thing is like, it's so easy to do phishing that it's like, I'm hitting like 60% effectiveness on click through. I'm getting passwords that I shouldn't be getting from these people. It is, when you do that for a living, you realize how horrifically bad it is. One thing I actually recommend companies do, although it's easier if you're a small company, it's hard if you're a big company, is isolate everything associated with your email domain away from production. Production, if you're company.com, production's got to be something else. It can't be company.com, and literally delink those two. So when you get a ransomware event taking over AD in your entire environment, it can't get into production. You really need to isolate those. For a lot of companies, that's hard to do. And the same thing,
advice.
You probably shouldn't be giving everybody in the call center company.com emails so that they can engage or start a business, negotiation on your behalf, or buy a ship or something that says it's in your company's name. But, there's a lot of things companies shouldn't be doing that they just never have thought through because they haven't had the mistake hit them in the face yet. So, anyway, I can go deep on that, but,
so would you consider the call center, I don't know if you would call this a supply chain attack, but is that a supply chain type issue?
If it's a third-party call center, it definitely is a supply chain. The bigger issues I see with supply chain is actually through administrative credentials. Instead of sending the data it's something where it's like a high to low kind of like read-only fashion, because a lot of times we just need the data, and we don't need the data necessarily quickly. It might be as long as we get an update within 5 minutes and stuff. There are exceptions where you do need real-time data and stuff, and the security of that is different. But we generally, and I would say this by large, like culturally, give way too much administrative access into our production networks to third parties. And so you'll end up having, even if let's say you have 500 vendors, you might only give 74 of them access to your production environment in such a way that they can actually control systems in there. But it's frequently, 73 of them didn't actually need that. It was just a matter of transferring data fast enough. And, we're just so used to doing it in a way that's easier or sloppier that we tend to make all these different connections between these companies. And when you get an attacker inside, the first thing that they do is they say, what have I got access to? Maybe I only got in on your firewall and I'm looking for other VPN keys. And it's like, oh, this is a tunnel to get into somebody else's production network. I may not have even gotten in really into your network. I just got into that firewall. But because you have these tunnels, that lets
But it's a VPN, Trey. It's secure.
Right.
It's a secure tunnel. I don't know what you're talking about. It's all secure.
Yeah. Oh, and VPNs. Right now, there's another big problem that I still run into is COVID caused a lot of companies to make VPN architecture mistakes. They're like, we got to get everybody on the VPN quick. And they just flat networked it to their entire production network. And they shouldn't have done that at all. And those VPN devices are prone to failure and security problems at a place that drops them on a network that has access to all of your production. And that is it's a red hot fire depending on which vendor you had. But most people really need to go back and build a high quality architecture around that they don't have. And they just never went back. They were like, we were in such a rush in COVID, and that was just the way things went.
Are VPNs out of date? Should we be doing things a different way?
Yeah. So no, it's not that VPNs are out of date. VPNs are really, really useful in certain cases. It's that it's a single control and you need to have multiple controls. And then
Okay.
likewise, understand that that device can get hacked. And then when somebody hacks that device, does it go through another firewall that's physically separate, or is it just smack straight on your network? Because if you can add another firewall, it's like, okay, they compromised the VPN, they got in there, but they can't get in through that to other areas and stuff. There's a lot of different ways you can prevent attackers from escalating further into your network.
Right, right. Yeah, I've seen things that I don't know what you would categorize this under, but say something like Tailscale, which is a way so I can remote in. It's kind of like it's doing its own tunneling, I guess. So if I want to remote admin into a system, I install a thing, and then I can just sort of just jump directly into that box without going through the whole VPN rigmarole.
We have a lot of problems with. So there is a way to do it where there's less attack surface, and that less attack surface method of doing it is a little bit more useful. The problem we have is that a lot of the third parties that are used for backdoor VPNs and stuff like that, so application level VPNs, those eventually have security problems. And when they have a security problem, if a lot of times it can be like a dark IT project and, a web developer wanted to access a web server from home and they installed something that gave them a backdoor shell and nobody in the security team knows about it. Maybe that developer quit and went on to another job and it just left it hanging. And then next thing you know, it's like, 5 versions behind and has 3 major vulnerabilities on it. So yeah, there's a catch 22, but there is a shape in a way to do remote access that can be a lot stronger. And then there's places where the remote access needs to be very limited. And we say like, well, we only want these people getting into the call center area. We don't want them getting into the production network. Maybe we use 2 different VPNs. Maybe we use 2 entirely different systems for those.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of architecture tricks that can fix that, but again and again and again, a lot of the basic security rules that we would have, just people don't apply it. The other thing that I see is, person who owns a company that does pen testing, I can't tell you how many companies do not keep external routers and VPNs in scope. And then also there's a lot of pen testers that don't know how to test those devices. They're only used to testing, like web servers and stuff. And again and again and again, especially if you look in the last 3-4 years, Chinese attackers are going wild on infrastructure. Whether it's voice over IP systems, because you also have these voice over IP systems that are exposed to the internet. Those are a great place to break into, get into a network. And companies frequently will just say that's out of scope for the pen test because they don't want the pen test to cost more. And then there's a lot of pen testers that they have no idea how to test, a VPN because that's a whole different set of skills than what you'd use for testing a website. So,
Right. Or even the danger it might be disruptive, right? So I'll run a pen test. Oh, nobody can call out because you literally just didn't mean to through your pen testing, but you took down the voice over IP
right.
system.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it feels like for some of these administrative tasks, that AI should be able to help with that from a defender standpoint. That I would imagine a future, maybe not in the not too distant future, that a lot of these sort of boring administrative things of just, person leaves, let's go decommission all the accounts and just double, triple check on all the different things, just to have sort of a brain, a bigger brain that's keeping track of all those kinds of things. You have guardrails on it, so it's not, hopefully doing things that like when Copilot got hacked, but it can only turn certain knobs and levers, but basically like give it the power to be able to do these kinds of things quickly, because if you leave it to a human, it's an administrative thing, and okay, maybe you only check those things according to your SOC 2, and that's every 90 days, whatever it is. I don't know, it feels like there's so much opportunity for automating
Yes.
our way out of some of these kinds of things.
And I'll say something. One interesting thing about security is security has a component where lots of stuff is the same and there's a lot of auditing. I love seeing AI tools that do auditing functions that actually go through. They're really, really good at that. the area that is problematic is security is a little different than other areas. It's different in science. So a lot of sciences like math, you get where you're building up one bit of science on another, on another, on another. You have a lot of engineering that has very structured, you got to do A to B to C to kind of build these things. Security is a little different in that security is basically built on dealing with all the weird exceptions. Like, this one weird combination of bits makes this system do something it shouldn't have done. In one area that is actually kind of problematic, although they're working on it, is getting better at like, how do we deal with all these different edge cases? And LLMs are better when there's large amounts of historical data or large amounts of examples that you can train it on and say, like, these are the things I want you to catch. With auditing, we can simulate or actually have lots of information that it's like, this is what we want you to catch is anytime this is happening. But with some of the more cutting edge attacks, it's really hard to ferret out the exceptions at a high rate of speed. And so there's an area where it works really, really, really well. And there's an area where we haven't really gotten it to work well yet. And there's a lot of companies working on both of those different areas. And one thing that I see is that, like, if your product works with, let's say LLMs get to 95% efficiency or whatever, your product can live and work great at 95% efficiency, and it works like incredibly well with that. But there are other products where it will really only work if you hit 100%. And I think a lot of companies based their bets that we would hit 100% and are finding out like, it might not hit 100%. It might just, like there's a Pareto principle, 80-20 law or something with LLMs, and it just never quite crosses that line. So the cost to get to capture every exception gets very expensive. And that's a problem fundamental to security. So, but like I said, I love seeing some of the LLMs that make certain tasks easier. They are incredibly useful tools. You just got to know this is where they're going to work well. This is where they're not going to work at all. So,
I think things, again, on the defender side. So let's say you're in a SOC. You have a tier 1 analyst, right? So they see a lot of alerts, dealing with a lot of false positives. And that seems like that's ripe for opportunity there for LLMs. Again, a tier 1 person is not going to be very experienced typically, right? Because it's not fun. It's a lot of just repetitive work. And so that person is going to have a certain error rate anyway, right? And so if you can get the LLM to be as good as your average SOC analyst, then I think that's good. That's a win. If you can do that, if you can now have those kids or whoever it is, doing other things, and because there's so many other problems we have in cybersecurity, right? But I think it's those kinds of things to maybe not be dealing with machine learning and aspects itself, but just like targeted things, like we're just looking at alerts. We're just looking at alerts on these kinds of things and trained it on that. Of course, there's going to be hallucinations. Of course, it's not always going to get it right. But what do you think about that?
So I want to point out one thing, and I have a really good slide or visual to show about this, but it's, if you think of an attack going from an attacker through a bunch of devices, it hits your edge firewall, can go through other devices to the web server, can go through devices to the database. And then after that, it goes to a SIM, gets logged, triggers go off, it hits a SOC, maybe an investigation gets triggered, then we go into forensics. In a very realistic standpoint, the SOC is the wrong place to stop attacks, because that's after you've been punched in the face and lost the war in a sense. And so the SOC, the time period, so not only does the attacker have to get in, logs have to occur, the logs then have to get moved, the logs then have to get processed, then you might have an AI on top of it. The amount of time going past is almost too great, and it's very human-centric. Our idea of a SOC was we were like really replicating what, when we were sending people to the moon, having this like big environment with screens and human operators responding.
But it looks cool. I have all the screens
cool.
on the wall. I'm in the command seat. They kept promising me the single pane of glass, for God's sakes. I want the single pane of glass.
But I think that the attitude of replicating a human and putting it that far back in the timeline or the attack chain, like that far back, is really not taking advantage of these the way we should.
Okay.
And what we should be doing is putting as much of the stuff into what information can I grab from threat intelligence or whatever, what can I block in a WAF to not let the attack ever hit the front end web server. And there's a lot of different devices we can put in front of these systems that we don't do that with. Equivalently, also, companies repeatedly make this one mistake that drives me crazy is we have these things that are for supply chain networks. And so we know that like 80, 100, it can be 1,000, it can be 100,000, doesn't matter how many it is, but we know that there's a fixed number of companies that are going to come from a set of IP addresses. Yeah. We can use tools like IPset. IPset is this thing that works on IP tables. So if you have a Linux firewall, you can crush 5 million IPs into this binary list and it'll block things really quick.
Right.
All that is to say is instead of your supply chain portal being open to the planet Earth for every attacker in the world to hit, if you were to do allow lists and say, well, we know it's going to be this company or these 75 companies.
Stark Industries. Let those guys in.
We can just remove that attack surface from the public internet. And there's so many things like that we can do to reduce attack surface that we're crazy not to be doing. And then similarly, there's so many things that we should be doing to prevent attacks that, again, we're not doing. And we need AI to be doing more on the preventing attacks and not acting like a slow human well after the attack has occurred. And so I think we still need those tools. Like, don't get me wrong, we do need things that are analyzing the logs, analyzing the SIMs. I think where we stick those in needs to be pushed, so to speak, to the left and closer towards the attacker. Basically, all of our defenses probably need to be like 2 or 3 steps closer to the attacker than they are. And we're still in this mode of doing things after the fact. And it's a bad model.
I like this. So this is AI versus AI now, what you're talking about. Because they got their AI attacking. Now you're talking about we're going to have our AI watching.
And there's a lot of, I have a lot of visualizations of tools that we can't buy yet, but I think are going to come into the market. And there's a lot of different tools also for large scale ISPs and for larger scale governments and stuff. There's a lot of tooling that should exist. We know how to build it, but I don't think anybody's working on necessarily all of those problems. And part of the reason is we keep replicating, trying to repeat what humans do now. And I don't think that's what the future is going to look like. And I think we need to start building towards what the future models are going to look like on speed terms, if nothing else.
Are there any vendors that you see, maybe they don't have a product yet, but are working toward those kinds of things that you're describing?
No, I mean, I know some exist.
He's under NDA, folks. Yeah,
I actually am under NDA for some things. So, but I also do see a lot of. So I review a lot of AI security companies, and I'm looking at a lot of different tools.
I like how you went companies like
this. And I see a lot of mistakes that sometimes I want to tell them hey, you really should be working on this other problem, but it's like a pivot to them. Yeah. But, I don't have a real good relationship. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. And so there's no point in me kind of doing that. And the other thing is sometimes they've invested so much. I feel like if I do this, I'm basically going to pop that company, and I don't want to pop their bump. Nobody wants to hear that their idea is bad, so to speak. But and then the other thing, sadly, I see there's a whole class of AI security tooling that is more valuable for attackers than it is for defenders, but they're selling it to defenders. And I'm like, man, this is
all right. Let's name names. What kind of tools are we talking about here?
So the class of tools that are doing AI pen testing and AI red teaming.
Okay.
They make a certain set of mistakes, but they're darn useful for doing some certain things quickly. And so if you were using that to break into sites, it's really, really useful. It's incredibly useful. It's incredibly fast. But it misses just massive gaps in what it'll assume and what it'll skip. And so I see that area as being very problematic right now. I think in the future it'll get better, but I think there's a lot of things that they don't take into account, especially if you're a large scale business. And there's a lot of things they simply will never test. And there's things where they don't test because there's ambiguity in the results. Like you may have this, and under certain situations that's good, and other situations it's bad. And when it has ambiguity, it's like, just don't even test it because it's too much of a gray area. And so there's lots of things that a very skilled pen tester would catch and would be able to tell you about, but those tools are horrible. They will just skip it every time. Now, that said, they are better than the bottom half of the market. And so if you look at like the really cheap pen tests or what we call a really, really horrible pen tests and stuff like that, I think those tools are better than some of the bad pen testers that are out there. But that's a low bar in some ways. And so a lot is getting skipped. So
when you do pen tests, how much of it is you found stuff that the company didn't even know existed? Just like infrastructure. Here's a router, here's a thing. It's just like devices or even whole applications.
Sure.
That they didn't know exist. How often does that happen?
All the time. And so part of it depends on the type of engagement, because I get pulled in different types of engagements. I don't always get to write the scope. I wish they would involve me in the scope. Sometimes it's like some company put an RFP out. The RFP was poorly written and it's scoped too low to actually include any of that. Sometimes I'll actually, like with nonprofits, I'll actually just do that and give it to them. But I won't put it in the same report. I'll be like, by the way, you just need to know this is out there and stuff. I know you can't afford it, but like, this is a thing. So I keep a copy of the entire internet's DNS. And one of the things that I like to do is search through that. But there's also a lot of different tools. Census is a great tool where you can analyze. Cert.sh is another one. I can go look at the history of every certificate that has your company name in it. That might have been a dark IT project on a different cloud. I'll go through all the DNS. I might find different cloud projects. I might find there's a company that's a lookalike company. It looks exactly like yours, but one character's off. There's a lot of different tests that I can do running against those types of databases and data sets that are really useful. And some of that data gets updated in real time. Like the cert stream ones, those are updated within seconds. Sometimes it's updated. I can find the development site you launched an hour ago, and I can start attacking it before your developers have had a time to install any security controls. And so if they didn't test all that before they made it open on the internet, I'm in there. I'm going into that, and then I'm going to pivot off that using any controls that have shared credentials. And that could be your CI/CD system, your backup system, whatever. I'm boom into your network and out. And a lot of companies just don't even know that that data is out there. They don't know it's exists. A lot of pen testers don't know that data exists. But I find stuff like that all the time. I mean, when you go looking, you will find it. The other similar thing is you can also start looking for where their documentation leaks, and they may have a vendor who has a problem that's leaking their data out to the public. And it might be an unsecured S3 bucket, or it might be something else like that. And so sometimes you end up finding when you're doing these OSINT things, you find security problems that aren't that company's, like their entity owned stuff. It's actually their third party vendor that leaked everything to the internet. So I've had times where I found those. And there's times where I've found attackers, and like I'm pen testing and I'm like, yeah, this is backdoor and you got a hacker in your network. I mean, and it's like instantly turns into an incident. So, I see a lot of different things like that. And it's very important when people hire pen testing companies to hire and pay for quality and not get the cheap ones that are literally just running a handful of scanning tools and giving you a bad report. The other reason I also mention it too is a really good example that I like to use is a lot of the security testing tools will give you a result, and that result is not always the best way to secure the problem.
What do you mean by that? When you say give you a result, what do you mean?
So the tools might say, well, this is a vulnerability, it's a SQL injection, and this is how you fix SQL injections, or this is a coding problem and you have to do this. Sometimes that could be an architectural problem that takes you 3 months to fix. And that's all they tell you. They just say, like, this is how you fix it, we're done, we're out. And whereas if a company cares about you, they'll realize, oh, and you have a WAF, and you're running Linux, and you do this. I might be able to say, like, well, you've got a WAF here. We can block this at the WAF. We can block this in IP tables. We can do these other things. And we can do these things within an hour. while you then spend 3 months fixing that back-end piece. But we can actually block it right now. And so cheaper pen test companies, they're letting you, hope you figure that out on your own, but you're more than likely going to leave that vulnerability open for 3 months, where somebody who can help you with the security architecture, like, I can show you how to shut it down now. We can get this thing shut down in minutes. Like, just do this, and you need to do this now. Similarly, there's things where I see and this is also an issue with some of the AI ones. The AI ones don't know to pick up the phone and call because something super bad is here, and it's just like, I'm going to grind through a report and send it in an email, whatever. And it's like, there's times where it's like, hey, we've got to stop and call the client immediately because this is like huge problem.
Right.
So there's things like that I think are problematic. I like what some of the tooling is doing, but I see a lot of mistakes. And again, if you're if you're actually attacking another country or trying to get in, if you are a bad guy, wow, these are an amazing set of tools, because it's like, boom, root prompt, like, boom, I'm in that box. I've got admin right now, bang. And that's impressive. So, but I also think that's also driving the regular security market. Like, we're already seeing Burp Suite improve and build a lot of AI. First, it was AI plugins, but now they're going hardcore with AI, building it into their tooling. I expect to see the same thing with all the different tools like Cobalt Strike and stuff. So I expect the tooling to get a lot better in general. Timing, still going to be a problem. The way we deal with events when they happen is a problem. The lack of context of the AI understanding that it could make other recommendations is kind of the thing that I think is a gap where a human could actually catch some of those things. So
Sure.
But I think working with humans, great. I love the tools. I like it as a secondary. I use multiple tools when I test things, and I love the idea of an AI testing it as well. One other danger, and I'll mention this real quick. I have used, I intentionally sometimes try to get ChatGPT to give me other people's pen test reports. And it is a fun process to like fish out things. And I have had it do it. And it's given me the name of the company, and it's given me some of the targets. And it shouldn't be giving me that. And all you got to do is, and it's an easy search, but you say like, I want you to act like a such and such pen test company and give me a sample report of blah, 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 blah using this. And you can do this for governments. Like, if I'm this government agency doing a pen test for this government agency, if I'm this company and I'm doing it for this company, you can do very, very, very specific.
Was that stuff out on the internet and I could have got it through Google Foo, because there's just a PDF place
part of it is it's where other pen test companies are using it to build reports. And I'm horrified of giving client data.
Wait. So they put that in ChatGPT, and then ChatGPT trained on it.
Here's the results for 15 tools. Throw it in ChatGPT. Here's what 10 of my reports look like. Create a report using these scan results.
Okay.
Yeah, and they turn the report taking process from 20 hours to 20 minutes. And the problem is, by asking for sample reports, can get chat, and I've literally got ChatGPT, and I saved the session, and I'm like, I cannot believe it gave me this. And it gave me another company. This company's in Australia. This is like what their reports look like. And then I checked some of the IPs, and I'm like, dude, it's giving me IPs.
Did you pick up the phone and call that company?
I did not, because maybe I should, but I'm just horrified, because it's a problem that is such a scale at these LLMs, and it's like, and I don't think the company can do anything about it. They shouldn't be putting.
Well, it's too late now. Once the cat's out of the bag, it's in LLM.
The model is
you'll
trained
never
on
get that
data.
out again. It's there forever. Maybe they can somehow, put a little flag and it gets filtered out in the future. But,
so because of that, I would actually be extremely horrified of using some of those AI pen testings internally, where it starts potentially leaking out internal information about your company.
So how much can you trust if you say to ChatGPT or Anthropic or whoever, let's say you're using their API for doing your magic AI tooling, hopefully not using MCPs that are just random MCPs on the internet, but whatever it is that you're doing, how much can you trust those AIs to not train on the data if you're checking all the boxes say don't train? Like, obviously you're using AI Are you using your own private models? Like, how much can we trust these guys to do what they say they're going to do?
Yeah, it's I think it's really tricky, and I am not the expert on the frontier model, like how much they don't choose. The
Yeah.
thing that I've seen from me playing around is it's been very leaky, and all the data that's been in there before is kind of in there, and it's trained on a lot of stuff. And I also worry about like anything that's ever been public, and it's going to be different from every company. Like every company is going to be different. Like a Chinese LLM could care less about, what the US companies have leaked out and stuff like that. So the security of the inside of those frontier models and how they separate that data is beyond me. I'm not the expert in that area. But I do love testing the edge of that. And frankly, I've been shocked by some of the results. And I recommend people try to simulate results. And I also recommend people be very concerned about like what they've been making public or not knowing that they had made public in a lot of cases, because it could be picking it up in some other thing. GitHub also is kind of an interesting thing, simply because GitHub's been pulled into so many of these large language models. And there are times where people have had code that shouldn't have been on GitHub, and you can recreate some of those things by having it, because it's trained on that. And you can get very, 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 very specific queries might give you very, very unique pieces of internal code,
Right. With their keys and connection strings and
But I'm still
stuff.
horrified of some of that. I don't trust it fully on that. I view external pen testing as very different than internal, because external is open to all attackers on the planet. Effectively, a lot of that data could be considered public, and you're getting attacks. If you just open up an IP address on the internet, your first attack's probably within 4 minutes. Like we're getting attacks that hit every IP address on the internet on average every 4 minutes.
Yeah.
So a tremendous amount of that data is public, whether you know it or not. And so LLMs can learn off all that public data and go crazy. But yeah, it's the amount that people are personally uploading is probably horrific. I know for a fact that a lot of companies are doing that. I was very concerned about like classified information, stuff like that. I know that they've got some, like there's a chat gpt.gov, which I hope is on a completely different system and stuff. But, I wonder if somebody actually makes a mistake and uploads something into the wrong one occasionally. Like what happens under those circumstances and stuff.
Yeah. I know you can get a special enterprise type license with OpenAI to do those kinds of things.
Yeah, they say under certain paid contracts, they don't train on the model, but all the free ones, they do train on it.
But even now, because of the current court case that is taking place with the New York Times suing them, they're keeping all chats, even ones that you delete, even if you're on the paid pro model, even if you're on the paid $200 a month model, all chats. Not that they're training on those, but all that is kept somewhere because pending the outcome of this court case. So,
but I would also say that's one visible model. There's a lot of invisible models that get used. So Copilot analyzing the email. If a report was sent in email, Copilot's got it. If you're using Grammarly, if you put the whole report in Grammarly, Grammarly's got the vulnerabilities and stuff like that. Grammarly has your internal stuff. That's suddenly going to Ukraine. Like if Russia takes over the Grammarly offices, then Russia's got that data. If somebody's tapping that line, whatever it is. There are hundreds of AI tools, Photoshop, like there's all these different things. And so I'm real picky about like, if I use Grammarly, I'm going to open up Grammarly as a document. I might write an executive report in that, but I don't use that tool across the vulnerabilities, especially if it's an internal one. Like you definitely don't want this like horrific thing that I know the customer can't fix for 3 months because it's an architecture problem. I don't want to ship a copy of that to Ukraine, to like wherever it is and stuff like that. It's not that I don't trust Grammarly or Ukraine and stuff. It's just like, that's a bad practice to be sending this out to all these different shares.
Right.
It's literally a different type of supply chain problem that most companies, when you ask them what their supply chain is, they're not including any of those apps.
No,
they're not
because
including
it's just,
those tools.
It's like the Wild West now. It's kind of back to the early days of the internet, but like on steroids times a million. I came into this discussion, Trey, thinking that you were going to give me some, I won't say that you haven't given me hope, but I just thought it's like, okay, he's going to tell me if we do these certain things, everything's going to be okay. And now I feel like it's Mad Max. That's our future. It's Mad Max. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I'll also say
it's
that
crazy.
I think Bruce Schneier was the first person I heard this quote from, I'm a short-term pessimist and a long-term optimist
Yeah.
about
I like that.
any given
Yeah.
technology.
Sure.
My bigger problem that I'm worried about right now is our business culture. It is
Okay.
hard to get companies on board with doing security. And it's hard to get them to think long term is what I actually find the problem to be is short term thinking is prioritized because of the agile model. And one of the ways I describe this is companies will do short term thinking across 60 different areas of their company when realistically every company is a little different. And they should have had 4 or 5 of those boxes say, let's prioritize long term thinking here. Long term thinking with backups, long term thinking with disaster recovery, long term thinking with security.
Yeah.
Those are 3 things that you can't, security is a long-term game. You can't win by just thinking it in short-term context.
Yeah.
And the cost of security fixes sometimes are exponentially expensive where we
Sure.
think in linear terms and we think like, oh, let's skip this in this sprint. And it's like, well, it's $5,000 now. If you wait till next year, it's $5 million a year plus your entire rate of cost is going to go up by $1 million a year because we're going to have a team of 12 people doing instant response on this mess up every, couple of weeks.
Yeah, maybe it can be both. Maybe you can have even 80% of the company's resources if they're doing development, agile stuff on short-term things, but then you have a certain percentage, say 20%, that is focused on longer-term things. To me, both and seems a better. So,
But our business culture has definitely said, let's go short term on everything.
yeah.
And
Sure.
that has fundamentally messed up some things. And it has massive economic damage on these companies, although they don't realize it when they're making those mistakes.
But the shareholders report is due
Yes.
at the end of the quarter. So, yeah.
So I try to educate boards and senior executives on understand that the linear thinking you have around like costs and delaying costs on some of these things don't always apply to security. It does work in some, like a honeypot costs the same now to implement this month or next year, but your core architecture, mistakes you make now are going to cost you so much money down the road and could have been prevented for so cheap. I sometimes see mistakes. It's like 1 hour of fixing this, changing one thing, just changing so your cookies do one thing different could have saved you from rebuilding a massive infrastructure. And yet they'll go down that path blindly for a while until it's too late.
Well, we'll leave it at that. That's a great point to leave in the end there. Just fix those immediate problems. And a good way to do that is to get some quality, not the low, but some quality pen testing, such as what your company does to start with. So at least you know what those mistakes are that you can take care of right away. So Trey Blalock, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been amazing to talk with you about all these different things. We could go on and on, I feel like, about this, but it's been wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, this has definitely been fun.
All right. Thank you so much for tuning in to Data and Confused. I really appreciate you listening. Please go ahead and subscribe as I get this podcast off the ground. I have a lot of amazing guests planned, industry experts and thought leaders from the tech and cybersecurity world. So look forward to seeing you in future episodes. Thank you.